She walked in knowing it would end her life in Korea. Knowing her visa, her job, her safety were already gone. The only thing left was the truth. Her employer, the tech CEO, was dead. She saw the killer. And when she gave his name to the Seoul police, the detective behind the desk went pale, because the man she named was the police chief's son. Her name is Amara Johnson. For 2 years, she was the sole driver and confidential aide to Min Yi-hoon, the visionary founder of Atlas Technologies. She was in the car when he was shot. Now, she is the only witness, and the evidence she carries threatens to ignite a war between Seoul's most powerful tech empire and its most untouchable police dynasty. This is what happens when the only person who saw everything has nothing left to lose. Amara arrived in Seoul 3 years ago with a degree in mechanical engineering, fluent in Korean, and a reputation for discretion cultivated in private security details from Dubai to Monaco. The offer from Atlas Technologies was simple: complete confidentiality, absolute loyalty, and access to the inner circle of a man reshaping the future. Min Yi-hoon wasn't just a CEO, he was a national icon. His company's facial recognition software, Oculus, was embedded in half of Seoul's public cameras, a contract worth $4.3 billion, signed and championed by the Metropolitan Police Agency. Her first day, Min laid out the only rule: you see everything, you hear everything, you say nothing. The car is a vault. She drove the black Genesis sedan, memorized his rhythms, learned that his 4 a.m. departures meant a breakthrough, and his silent 8 p.m. returns meant a problem even he couldn't solve. She became more than a driver. She was a fixed point in his chaotic orbit, the one person not asking for money, favor, or stock options. In 18 months, he stopped taking calls in the backseat. He'd lean forward, partition down, and talk to the rearview mirror about board coups, about pressure from the National Intelligence Service, about Police Chief Park Shin-won. The Park family was a dynasty. Chief Park's father had commanded the agency during the military dictatorship. His son, Park Jae-hun, was a lieutenant in the very cyber investigations unit that used Atlas's Oculus software. The conflict was an open secret. Min Yi-hoon believed the software was being misused for political surveillance and blackmail. Chief Park believed Min was an arrogant tech boy threatening national security by withholding data. Their feud was a Cold War fought in newspaper columns and closed-door committee hearings, and Amara was the chauffeur in the middle of it. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in October. Min had just testified before the National Assembly. In the car, he was furious. "They're using my code to track protesters, to find mistresses, to ruin lives. It has to stop." He was drafting an internal kill switch protocol, a backdoor to disable Oculus's surveillance functions if he deemed it unethical. He called it the moral circuit. That night, his personal server was hacked. The only people who knew about the moral circuit were his CTO, his lawyer, and the woman who drove him home. Pressure escalated. A week later, Min's lead engineer on the Oculus project was arrested for alleged data trafficking. The evidence was flimsy. The arresting officer was Lieutenant Park Jae-hun. It was a warning shot. Min told Amara, "They're not after my company. They're after my silence. We proceed with the kill switch." His defiance was a declaration of war. Then the surveillance on Amara began. Subtle at first. A motorcycle mirror fixed on her as she left her apartment in Mapogu. A wrong number call that stayed silent. She reported it to Atlas Security. They found a non-traceable GPS puck magnetized to the sedan's undercarriage, professional grade, the kind used by intelligence agencies. Min went to Chief Park directly. The meeting lasted 9 minutes. Min returned to the car white with rage. He said, "He told me to fire you, to deport you. He said a foreign driver was a security liability." Amara offered to resign. Min refused. "If you go, they win. You stay, we fight." He increased her salary, moved her to a secure company apartment, and gave her a dedicated encrypted line. She was no longer just staff. She was an ally, and that made her a target. The night of November 12th was clear and cold. Min had worked late at the Pangyo R&D campus. He was quiet during the drive, scrolling through legal documents. At 11:23 p.m., as they turned onto the secluded service road leading to his private residence in Yongsan, a black Hyundai Grandeur sedan without plates sped up from a blind alley and forced them to stop. Amara's training kicked in. She locked the doors, threw the car in reverse. But a second vehicle, a van, blocked them from behind. Two men in black masks approached Min's window, not to open it. One raised a pistol fitted with a suppressor. Amara screamed a warning. Min turned. The window exploded. The sound was a soft pop like a book dropping on carpet. Min Yi-hoon jerked forward, then slumped against the shattered glass. The shooter stood for a 3 count, ensuring the job was done. In that moment, the streetlight caught his eyes through the mask's hole, and his right hand gloveless on the pistol's grip. On his wrist was a distinct platinum Patek Philippe watch with a blue face. A watch Amara had seen only once before, at a charity gala, on the wrist of Lieutenant Park Jae-hun. The car sped off. Silence. The smell of gunpowder and broken glass. Amara's hands were locked on the steering wheel. She turned. Min's breath was a wet, ragged bubble. She called the emergency line. She gave the address. And then she did the one thing protocol forbade. She took out her phone, and she took 3 photographs of the shattered window, of Min's position, and a single, blurry but unmistakable shot of the shooter's wrist and that watch as he turned to run. The police arrived in 4 minutes. The ambulance in 6. Min Yi-hoon was pronounced dead at 11:52 p.m. The lead detective was courteous, efficient. He took her statement. She gave a description of the masks, the cars. She said nothing about the watch. She held the evidence in her hand, the phone burning a hole in her jacket pocket. She was taken to the Yongsan station for formal processing. It was there in the fluorescent-lit hallway that she saw him, Lieutenant Park Jae-hun. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a dark polo shirt and jeans, and on his wrist was nothing. His eyes met hers. Not the glance of an investigator to a witness. It was a cold, assessing stare. Then he smiled. A small, polite, terrifying smile, and walked into the office of the case supervisor. Amara sat in a sterile interview room for 2 hours. Her phone, still in her pocket, felt like a live wire. The detective returned with a senior officer. Their tone had changed. The questions became circular. Why did she take that route? Was Min Yi-hoon having an affair? Could this be a business rival from China? They suggested the watch she thought she saw was a trauma-induced confusion. They gently mentioned her visa status, the legal complexities for a foreigner involved in a homicide. They were building a wall of plausible doubt, brick by bureaucratic brick, between her testimony and the man who fired the gun. At 3 a.m. they released her. An Atlas security team picked her up. In the safety of her apartment, she reviewed the photo. The blue face of the watch was clear. The distinctive crown, it was him. She had proof. But proof presented to the same agency whose chief's son was the killer was a suicide note. She had 2 choices: run and let the Parks rewrite history, or walk into the one place they would never expect her to go and turn her evidence into a weapon. She put on her uniform jacket. She smoothed her hair. She transferred the photograph to a secure cloud drive and sent the link to Min Yi-hoon's private lawyer with one sentence: "If I disappear, release this." Then she walked out into the dawn. She did not call Atlas Security. She did not call a lawyer. She hailed a taxi. She gave the address of the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency's main headquarters in Yonggu, not the Yongsan precinct, the Central Command, the Lion's Den. She would file her witness report at the very heart of the system, creating a public record they couldn't erase. She walked through the sliding doors, approached the front desk, and asked to report a murder. When the desk officer asked for the suspect's name, she said it clearly: "Park Jae-hun, son of Chief Park Shin-won. I have the evidence here." And that's when the entire station seemed to freeze. Because the system was designed to handle criminals, it was not designed to handle the truth. The freeze lasted 8 seconds, then chaos under glass. The desk officer's pen stopped midair. A sergeant behind him slowly stood up. The name Park Jae-hun wasn't just a suspect, it was a tripwire laid across the entire floor. Amara placed her phone on the counter, the photograph of the watch displayed. I was there. I saw him. This was on his wrist. The sergeant picked up a landline, turned his back, and spoke in a low, urgent whisper. Within 90 seconds, Amara was no longer at the public counter. She was in a fourth-floor interrogation room, and the dynamic had inverted. She was no longer a witness reporting a crime. She was a potential problem requiring containment. Two inspectors entered. Their badges identified them as from the Internal Investigation Bureau. A good sign, she thought, until the questioning began. They focused not on the shooting but on her immigration history, her financial records, the specifics of her contract with Atlas. They asked why Min Yi-hoon trusted a foreigner with such access. They implied a romantic relationship. They suggested the photo could have been digitally altered, or that she might have been paid by Atlas's business rivals to frame a police officer. They were building the narrative she feared, the unreliable, ambitious outsider. But Amara had prepared. She narrated the events with forensic detail. The time, 11:23, the pop of the suppressor, the model of the Hyundai Grandeur, the exact shade of the watch's blue face. Consistency is the enemy of fabrication. She demanded to speak to a prosecutor from the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's office, bypassing the police chain of command. This was her first legal move, and it caused a visible crack. One inspector left the room. He returned 20 minutes later with a new directive. They would formally take her statement and the evidence. The photo was uploaded to a server. A case file was opened. And then they told her to go home. Do not leave the city. We will contact you. It was a tactic. Isolate and wait. Without Min Yi-hoon's protection, she was exposed. They were betting fear and inertia would do their work. But as Amara walked out of the headquarters at 9 a.m., she was met not by silence, but by a storm. The link she had sent to Min's lawyer had been a trigger. Kim Seok-woo, a man whose reputation was built on navigating the gray space between corporate power and political survival, had not released the photo. Instead, he had used it as a bargaining chip. He had gone directly to Chief Park Shin-won. A meeting was convened in the chief's private office at 10. Present, Chief Park, Kim Seok-woo, and a deputy commissioner. Kim laid out the facts dispassionately. Amara Johnson is a credible witness with physical evidence. Atlas will pursue this to the highest court. The alternative is a quiet, internal resolution. Resignation of Lieutenant Park Jae-hun for unrelated misconduct. A full, transparent investigation into the murder handled by an independent team from Busan. And the Oculus contract remains intact. It was a brutal, clean deal. Justice traded for stability. Chief Park listened, his face granite. He asked for proof of the evidence. Kim showed him the photo. The chief studied the image of the watch, the one he had given his son for his graduation from the police academy. He said only, "I need to speak to my son." What happened in that next hour is known only from scattered digital breadcrumbs and later testimony. Chief Park summoned his son. Lieutenant Park Jae-hun, according to his own phone records, entered his father's office at 10:47. At 11:05, the chief's secretary heard raised voices. The word idiot was used. At 11:20, Lieutenant Park left, his face pale. He did not return to his unit. He drove to his apartment in Gangnam. He was under the impression the deal would proceed. His career would be sacrificed, but he would avoid prison. The system would protect its own, as it always had. But Kim Seok-woo had misjudged one thing, the depth of Chief Park's corruption. The chief did not see a deal. He saw an existential threat. A witness with evidence backed by a vengeful corporation was a virus that could not be contained by a single resignation. It could unravel everything, the surveillance contracts, the political alliances, the family legacy. At 11:40, Chief Park made a call not to the Busan police, but to a man known only as the Architect, a fixer in the National Intelligence Service with deep ties to the cyber unit. The order was simple: discredit the evidence and neutralize the witness, permanently. The first move was technological warfare. At 12:15 p.m., A forensic analyst from the cyber unit accessed the server where Amara's photo was stored. A log was created showing a routine data integrity check. During this check, according to later audit trails, the file's metadata was altered. The timestamp was shifted by 24 hours, making it appear the photo was taken a day after the murder. A clumsy, glaring forgery, but one that created immediate reasonable doubt. The official story began to harden. A distressed driver, confused by trauma, perhaps manipulated by corporate interests, had presented fabricated evidence. Amara learned of this from a news alert on her phone at 1 p.m. A brief item from Yonhap News. Police investigate authenticity of key evidence in Atlas CEO murder, sources cited. No mention of Park Jae-hyun. The narrative was being sanitized in real time. Her secure phone, the one Min gave her, rang. It was Kim Seok-woo. They've broken the deal. They're coming for you. You need to get to Atlas headquarters now. It's the only building they can't raid without a media firestorm. Amara's apartment door buzzer sounded. She looked through the peephole. Two men in cheap suits, badges clipped to their belts. Not the Internal Investigation Bureau. They were from Immigration Control. They announced they had received an anonymous tip about visa irregularities and needed to inspect her documents. It was a legal pretext to detain her, to get her into a system where she could be lost. She grabbed a go bag, passport, cash, a second phone, and exited via the building's maintenance staircase, emerging into an alley just as the officers forced her front door. She used a ride-hailing app, paid in cash, and changed cars twice. By 2:30, she was in the underground parking garage of the Atlas Tower in Gangnam, escorted by a private security team to the executive floors. The atmosphere was a war room. Kim Seok-woo was there, along with Min Yi-hoon's younger sister and interim CEO, Min Soo-jin. They had pulled the full server logs from the night of the murder. They could prove the photo was uploaded to Amara's cloud at 11:28 p.m., 5 minutes after the shooting. The police's altered metadata was a fraud, and they could prove that too. But proof was no longer a matter of data. It was a matter of power. Min Soo-jin, a woman with her brother's sharp eyes and none of his public patience, made a decision. We go public, not with a press release, with a war. She authorized Kim to contact every member of the National Assembly's Science and Defense Committees. She released a curated dossier to 3 major newspapers, detailing the Oculus misuse, the pressure on Min, and the suspicious arrest of their engineer. The murder of Min Yi-hoon was framed not as an isolated crime, but as the culmination of a police campaign to seize control of sovereign technology. Amara's testimony was the centerpiece. At 4 p.m., the first article hit. The headline was a detonation. Atlas CEO murder. Witness points finger at police chief's son. For the first time, the name Park Jae-hyun was in public print, linked to the blue-faced Patek Philippe. The effect was instantaneous. News vans descended on the Metropolitan Police Agency. The opposition party demanded a parliamentary inquiry. The social media algorithms, ironically powered by Atlas's own analytics, set the story ablaze. Chief Park Shin-won held an emergency press conference at 6 p.m. He stood stiffly at the podium, his uniform heavy with medals. He called the allegations a malicious fiction fabricated by a corporation angry over legitimate police oversight. He confirmed his son was being questioned as a matter of procedure, but emphasized his son's distinguished record. He did not look at the cameras. He looked through them, and then he issued a warning. Foreign nationals involved in criminal cases must be thoroughly vetted. We will not allow our legal process to be manipulated by external forces. It was a direct, threatening message to Amara. That night, in a safe room within Atlas Tower, Amara watched the press conference. Kim Seok-woo sat beside her, reviewing a new document that had just arrived via encrypted email. It was from a whistleblower inside the Cyber Investigations Unit. A series of financial transfers over the past 18 months, from a shell company in the British Virgin Islands to a Korean account under the name of Park Jae-hyun's mistress. The total was just over $2 million. The shell company was traced back to a defense contractor that had lobbied heavily for the Oculus contract. The money wasn't for the murder, it was the retainer. The whistleblower's note was succinct. The hit was ordered because Min found the money trail. He was going to the prosecutors next week. Jae-hun was the bagman, not the mastermind. This changed everything. Park Jae-hun wasn't just a rogue son covering up a crime of passion or arrogance. He was a corrupt officer at the center of a conspiracy that reached into the police, the defense industry, and possibly the intelligence service. Killing Min Yi-hoon was business, and Amara had witnessed a transaction, not just a murder. As this new reality settled, a second email arrived. This one was to Amara's personal account. It contained no text, only an attachment, a photograph taken from a long lens. It showed a woman in a raincoat, Lee Jae-won, the investigative journalist who had broken the initial story, entering her apartment building. The photograph was timestamped today. At 7 p.m. the message was clear. They were tracking everyone. The system's self-defense mechanism was activating, and it was targeting not just Amara, but anyone who amplified her voice. Kim Seok-woo looked at the photo, then at Amara. They're showing us they have no limits. The legal battle is over. Now it's a fight for survival, and you have to decide if you're willing to burn their house down with you inside it. Amara looked at the photo of the journalist, then at the financial records glowing on Kim's laptop. The burning house. She had come to Korea to build a life, not to become an arsonist. But Min Yi-hoon was dead in the back of her car. His sister was risking her company. A whistleblower was risking his life. The cost of walking away was no longer just her own safety. It was the corruption of an entire system. She made the decision in the silence of that safe room. If they want a war, they don't get to fight it in the shadows. We take it all public. Every document, every transfer, every name. Her first call was to the journalist Lee Jae-won. She bypassed Kim Seok-woo's cautious legal strategy. Using an encrypted video link, she told Lee everything. The watch, the altered metadata, the $2 million. She provided the whistleblower documents. She did not ask for protection or payment. She offered one thing, exclusive access to the witness on the record with conditions. The interview would be filmed and released in full, unedited, simultaneously on multiple international platforms. No Korean network could touch it first. Lee Jae-won, understanding the magnitude, agreed. The interview was set for the next morning in a broadcast studio owned by a foreign media outlet in Seoul, a legal gray zone. While Lee's team prepared, Min Soo-jin executed a corporate nuclear option. Using her authority as interim CEO, she initiated the moral circuit, the kill switch her brother had designed. At 2:17 a.m., the Oculus software in every police-operated camera in Seoul went dark for 47 seconds. A rotating error message appeared. System integrity compromised. Diagnostic required. It was a demonstration of power. A proof that Atlas controlled the eyes of the city and that those eyes could be blinded. The panic inside the police agency was immediate and total. Chief Park received the alert. He understood the message. The next blackout would be permanent unless a deal was made. But Chief Park was beyond deals. The demonstration cemented his resolve. He mobilized his last, most dangerous asset, the architect from the National Intelligence Service. The order was no longer discredit or detain. It was a race. Create an alternative narrative so shocking, so morally unambiguous, that the witness and her evidence would be immolated in the court of public opinion. They worked through the night. By dawn, they had their story. At 7 a.m., as Amara was being smuggled into the media studio disguised as a sound engineer, the Korean National Police Agency held its second press conference. This time, the spokesperson was not Chief Park, but a senior detective from the Homicide Division. His demeanor was grave, his words measured. He announced a tragic update in the Min Yi-hoon case. Following forensic analysis of the victim's personal devices, they had discovered evidence of a blackmail scheme. Mr. Min, they claimed, had been involved in a secret relationship with his driver, Amara Johnson. Fearing exposure and damage to his reputation as his wedding date approached, he had tried to end it. Miss Johnson, in a fit of jealous rage, had conspired with an unknown accomplice to murder him. The altered timestamp on her photo was proof of her attempt to create an alibi. The watch was a lucky detail she'd noticed on Lieutenant Park's wrist at a previous event. Furthermore, immigration records showed her visa was under review for falsified documents. She was, they concluded, a calculating manipulator who had played the victim after committing the crime. The effect was volcanic. The narrative flipped in minutes. News anchors regurgitated the theory. Social media, so recently supportive, erupted in a storm of xenophobia and misogyny. Comments called for her immediate deportation or worse. The words gold digger and black widow trended. The police, cleverly, did not exonerate Park Jae-hyun. They stated he was still under investigation for the unrelated bribery allegations, a sacrificial pawn to make the larger lie seem credible. They had reframed the entire saga. Amara was no longer David against Goliath. She was the villain. In the green room of the studio, Amara watched the broadcast on a monitor. Her hands were steady, but her breath was shallow. Lee Jae-won looked at her with pity and fear. "We can postpone. They've just destroyed you." Amara shook her head. "If I don't speak now, their story becomes history. Roll the cameras." The interview was raw, unflinching. Lee asked the hard questions, including the police's new allegations. Amara did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She answered with the same precision she used to describe the murder. She explained her visa was sponsored by Atlas, one of the most scrutinized companies in the country. She had no romantic relationship with Min Yi-hoon. She had a professional one built on mutual respect. She looked directly into the lens and issued a challenge. "If I am a blackmailer, where are the messages, the gifts, the financial traces? They have my phone. They have Atlas's servers. Show the evidence. All they have is a theory designed to protect a killer and the $2 million he took." Then she revealed the new piece she and Kim had held back. The whistleblower had provided a second file, audio, a 6-minute recording from a hidden device inside Chief Park's office dated the day after the murder. The voices were muffled but identifiable. "Chief Park, the driver saw the watch. She has to be discredited before she talks to the prosecutors." Another voice, believed to be the architect. "The immigration angle is cleanest. We plant the review, leak it. The public will believe a foreigner is capable of anything." Chief Park. "And my son," the architect. "He takes the fall for the bribery. A year in a comfortable cell, then parole. A small price. The important thing is the Oculus contract remains. That is non-negotiable." The recording ended. Amara's expression was stone. "That is the sound of your protectors planning my destruction and the murder of Min Yi-hoon before his body was cold." The full interview with subtitles was released at noon. It was a stone dropped into the already churning waters. It didn't calm them. It created a new, deeper split. The public fractured into hostile camps. Protests formed outside police headquarters. Counter-protests demanded Amara's deportation. The National Assembly descended into shouting matches. The story was now a national crisis. And in the chaos, the weakest link broke. Park Jae-hyun, watching his father sacrifice him for a contract, from the isolation of his apartment, panicked. He called his mistress. He told her to wire the remaining money in their shared account to an offshore number. It was a mistake. The call was intercepted by the very cyber unit he once commanded, now operating under the oversight of a desperate internal investigation bureau trying to save the agency's last shred of credibility. They traced the transfer. They raided the mistress's apartment, and they found a ledger, not a digital file but an old-fashioned paper notebook. In it, handwritten, were records of every payment from the defense contractor, with initials next to each: JHP for him and SWP for his father, Chief Park Shin-won. The conspiracy was familial. The $2 million bribe was a partnership. The investigator in charge of the raid faced an impossible choice: take the evidence to his superior, who reported to Chief Park, or leak it to the press and end his career. He chose a third path. He sent a photograph of the ledger page to Lee Jae-won, and a copy to the senior prosecutor who had been quietly assembling a case, independent of the police. The system had finally produced a honest gear, and it began to turn, grinding against the machine. By 8 p.m., Chief Park Shin-won was summoned to the office of the president. He was not seen leaving. At 9 p.m., a squad of prosecutors accompanied by Special Forces police arrived at the Gangnam apartment of Park Jae-hun. They arrested him on charges of murder, bribery, and conspiracy. He did not resist. He asked for one thing: a deal. He would testify against the defense contractor executives and the architect from the NIS. He would give them the whole pyramid. But he would not testify against his father. That was his line. Amara watched the arrest live on television from a new safe house, a private residence in the countryside owned by an Atlas board member. She felt no triumph, only a cold, hollow exhaustion. Min Soo-jin called her. "It's over. You did it." Amara replied, "It's not over. They arrested the son. They haven't touched the father. The man who gave the order to ruin me is still the chief of police. And until he falls, no one is safe." She was right. The next morning, Chief Park Shin-won resigned. Citing the unbearable pain of his son's crimes and the need for the agency to heal, he stepped down. He gave a tearful, masterful performance of a father broken by a rogue son's failings. He made no mention of the ledger. He accepted no responsibility. He walked out of headquarters to a mix of boos and sympathetic applause, a free man. The narrative was already shifting. A tragic family, a good man brought low by a bad seed. The architect from the NIS was quietly transferred to a diplomatic post abroad. The system was containing the damage, sacrificing pawns to protect the king. Kim Seok-woo told Amara this was the best possible outcome. Park Jae-hun would go to prison for life. The Oculus contract would be reformed. Her name would be cleared. She could sue for defamation. She had won. But Amara sat in the quiet of the safe house, looking at the serene garden, and knew this was not victory. This was a stalemate. Chief Park was free. The structure that allowed a police chief to order the framing of a witness remained intact. And she was still a foreigner in their system, a temporary player in a permanent game. That evening, she received a visit not from Kim or Min Soo-jin, but from the senior prosecutor, a woman named Hong Si-ra. Hong was direct. "We are charging Park Jae-hun. The bribery case against the defense contractors is proceeding, but the case against Chief Park, the ledger initials, are circumstantial. The recording is not admissible. It was illegally obtained. He will retire with his pension and his reputation wounded but intact. I am sorry. This is the justice the system can provide." Amara asked the only question that mattered. What happens to the next witness, the next person who sees something they should? Hong Si-ra had no answer. Amara understood then that her fight had never been about putting one man in prison. It was about exposing the mechanism. And that mechanism was still functioning, quietly repairing itself. She had one move left, a move that would transcend courts and borders and force a truth the system could not absorb. She asked Hong Si-ra for a single favor: 5 minutes in a room with Chief Park Shin-won. No lawyers, no recording. A private conversation before he disappeared into his comfortable retirement. Hong, intrigued and burdened by her own conscience, made it happen. The meeting was set in a neutral government conference room. 2 days later, Amara Johnson, in a simple black suit, walked in to face the former chief of police. He stood by the window, older-looking without his uniform, but his eyes were the same, cold, assessing. He spoke first. "You have caused a great deal of trouble. You should be grateful for the outcome you got." Amara did not sit. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table between them. It was a list of 11 names: Korean journalists, activists, and minor officials who had died in accidents or apparent suicides over the past 5 years. All had been investigating police corruption or defense contract irregularities. She said nothing. Park glanced at the list, his face impassive. Amateur conspiracy theories, tragedies. Amara finally spoke, her voice low and clear. "I am not a prosecutor. I am not a journalist. I am a witness. And tomorrow I am boarding a flight to London. From there, I will testify before the International Criminal Courts panel on crimes against justice. I will present every document, every recording, every name on this list. I will tell them how a police chief in Seoul orchestrated the murder of a businessman, the systematic framing of a witness, and the obstruction of justice to protect a bribery scheme. Your immunity ends at the border. Your son's deal vanishes when the world is watching. This is no longer a Korean matter. It is a global one. For the first time, Park Shin-won's composure cracked. A flicker of pure, undiluted fear. You can't. "Watch me," Amara said. She turned and walked out, leaving the list on the table and the former chief alone with the crumbling ruins of his impunity. The battle in Seoul was over, but the war for accountability was just beginning, and she was no longer a driver caught in the crossfire. She was the one steering the vehicle, and she was heading straight for the gates. The threat worked faster than Amara anticipated. The International Criminal Court does not move quickly, but the mere specter of its attention creates seismic political pressure. Within 48 hours of her meeting with Park Shin-won, the Blue House, the office of the president, intervened directly. A special independent counsel was appointed by the National Assembly with a mandate that bypassed the police and prosecution entirely. Their first subpoena was for the former chief. Their second was for Amara Johnson. The national scandal was now a formal judicial inquiry, and the world was watching. Park Jae-hyun, seeing his father's protection vanish, flipped entirely. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided a full confession that went far beyond the murder. He detailed a 5-year scheme where his father and the architect used the Oculus surveillance data to blackmail politicians and business rivals. The murder of Min Yi-hoon was not an isolated event. It was the most violent act in a long campaign of corruption. The $2 million bribe was just the latest payment. He gave names, dates, and bank accounts. The ledger was no longer circumstantial, it was a roadmap. Faced with his son's testimony and the certainty of an international spectacle, Park Shin-won's defense collapsed. He was arrested at his home in the early morning, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. The image of the former chief, handcuffed, being led into a prosecutor's office, was front-page news for a week. The system had finally turned on its own. The trial of the Parks was a national obsession. Amara testified for 3 days. She described the shooting, the watch, the campaign to destroy her credibility. She was calm, precise, and devastating. The defense tried to attack her character, but the foundation had crumbled. The altered metadata was proven to be internal police tampering. The immigration allegations were dismissed as fabricated. Her visa was formally reinstated with a public apology from the Ministry of Justice. The verdict came after 11 months. Park Jae-hyun was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole for 20 years. Park Shin-won was convicted on all major counts and sentenced to 35 years in prison, one of the longest terms ever given to a former police official in South Korea. The architect was recalled from his post abroad and sentenced to 15 years. 11 executives from the defense contractor were also imprisoned. The Oculus contract with the police was permanently terminated, and Atlas Technologies, under Min Soo-jin, pivoted the software to solely private security and disaster response systems. For Amara, the legal victory was complete, but the personal cost was a quieter, more complex reckoning. She was a hero to many, a controversial figure to others, and permanently marked by the violence she witnessed. Min Soo-jin offered her a permanent, high-level position in corporate security with a blank check salary. Amara declined. She could not return to the world of black sedans and confidential whispers. The car was no longer a vault, it was a crime scene. Instead, she accepted a different offer. With the substantial financial settlement from her defamation lawsuit against the state, and with backing from Min Soo-jin, she founded the Min Yi-hoon Center for Witness Protection and Legal Advocacy. Based in Seoul but operating internationally, the center provides legal, psychological, and logistical support to whistleblowers and witnesses of corporate or state corruption. with a special focus on women and migrants. Her first client was the cyber unit whistleblower who had provided the ledger. Her second was the widow of one of the journalists on the list she'd shown Park. Her work gave her a new purpose, but Seoul held too many ghosts. She moved her base of operations to The Hague, closer to the international courts, returning to Korea only quarterly. Her relationship with the country was forever changed, a place of profound betrayal and unexpected redemption. The final surprising detail emerged a year after the trial. While sorting through Min Yi-hoon's personal effects for archival at the center, Min Soo-jin found a sealed letter in his private safe addressed to Amara. He had written it 6 months before his death. It read in part, "Amara, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. Do not trust the police. The watch on Park Jae-hun's wrist is a vanity, but it is also a clue. He will not part with it. Use it. And then live a life that is not in my shadow. You were never just my driver. You were my fail-safe." He had seen the end coming, and he had placed his faith not in his lawyers or his security team, but in the woman who drove his car. She had fulfilled his final, unspoken command. On a Tuesday morning, Amara stands in her office in The Hague, looking at a framed front page of the Korean Times from the day of the verdict. Beside it hangs a simple keychain, the key to the black Genesis sedan, now in a museum exhibit about corruption. She does not think of herself as brave. She thinks of herself as someone who saw a broken glass and a blue-faced watch, and who understood that sometimes the only way to hold someone up is to first knock the thing hurting them down. The system did not reform overnight, but a precedent was set. A police chief was imprisoned. A witness was believed. A foreign worker's testimony held the same weight as a billionaire's. These are fragile victories, but they are real. The door of the police station she walked into remains open. And the next witness who walks through it will walk a path she carved, a little straighter, a little safer, because a driver from another country decided that her word was a weapon, and the truth was worth more than her life in Korea. Her story ends not with a verdict, but with a question she now asks every witness who comes to her center. What are you willing to protect? Your silence, or what's left of your world? Amara Johnson chose, and in choosing, she didn't just name a killer. She rewrote the rules of the game. The story of Amara Johnson is not a fairy tale. There was no perfect justice, only a messy, brutal, partial accounting. A powerful man is in prison, but the architecture that enabled him, the blend of corporate greed, police power, and political silence, still stands, waiting for the next pressure point. What her story proves is more fragile and more powerful, that within even the most rigid system, there is a breaking point. And sometimes, that point is a single person who decides the cost of their silence is higher than the cost of their voice. We tell these stories not because good always triumphs, but because we need to remember that the calculation of power is never static. It shifts when a witness refuses to be discredited. It fractures when a son betrays a father to save himself. It reconfigures when a corporation chooses principle over profit. Amara did not bring down the system. She exposed a crack in it. And through that crack, light finally reached a crime that was supposed to vanish into the darkness of a service road. Every society has its own version of that police station lobby, a place where the powerful expect the vulnerable to be processed and dismissed. The true measure of justice isn't what happens in the courtroom after the cameras arrive. It's what happens in that lobby in the first, silent moments. When the person with the least institutional protection walks in, holds up their piece of the truth and says, "This matters." That moment is the foundation everything else is built upon, or collapses without. Amara's legacy is measured in the witnesses who come after her, in the migrant worker who reports wage theft because she heard a driver did it and won, in the junior officer who leaks evidence because he knows a chief was once imprisoned for hiding it, in the billionaire who thinks twice before threatening a whistleblower. These are quiet, incremental changes. They are the real victory. She rewrote her own life from driver to advocate, from witness to guardian. But the more important rewrite was in the story Korea tells itself about who can be believed and who gets to author the truth. That story now includes a black woman in a chauffeur's uniform, standing in fluorescent light, speaking a name that would topple a dynasty. It is a permanent edit. So the next time you hear about a cover-up, about an inconvenient witness, about a system closing ranks, remember the weight of a blue-faced watch. Remember that evidence is only as strong as the person holding it. And that sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world is not a gun, but a memory backed by a conscience with nothing left to lose. This is the lesson she leaves us with. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of a truth so clear that fear becomes background noise. Stay aware of the silent battles being fought in lobbies and interrogation rooms around you. Stay dangerous to corruption. And as always, stay tuned for the stories that remind us why speaking up is the first and most revolutionary act of all.